Once I finished college, I saw a horrible choice before me. As much as I loved my brothers and sisters in Christ, I saw that the church was not a place where discernment and love for your neighbor were being practiced well. So was I to remain a part of it and be accepted, or set myself apart from wrongdoing and suffer the consequences of social suicide? Of course, I knew the answer, and in the end, I did what I was taught to do. Eventually, I told friends and family about my decision, which had already been obvious to them for some time. Most of my friends, raised in the same way as myself, showed me love and compassion. The adults who taught me these values, though, they asked me to violate their former teachings and conform, even though I knew it was wrong. When I refused, they outright begged me to at least stay quiet so that I wouldn't incur social consequences from Christians. Some directly admitted that I'd be treated badly if I spoke up about things that even they themselves thought were wrong, and then implored me to save myself rather than try to be a light in the darkness. I was astounded, really, and their response only motivated me to speak out more fervently. Looking back now, it's clear to me that I didn't leave the church in spite of my Christian upbringing, but rather because of it. From the perspective that the values I discussed here are Christian, it's fair to say that leaving the church was one of the most Christian decisions I've ever made. I don't think I'm alone either. I bet plenty of you watching could say the same thing. The question remains then, how did our parents' generation teach us these values, but then apply them so inconsistently as to let misinformation, bigotry, and moral complacency permeate the church? I wish I knew. Maybe you're just less open to new information and different kinds of people as you age. Maybe our culture encourages self-interest so strongly that it overrides altruistic values over one's lifetime. Maybe evangelical Christianity attracts people who value conformity a bit too much. I'm sure the answer is multifaceted, but I can't help but think that the origins of present-day evangelical culture do have something to do with it. Most of our parents' generation in the US, at least, were raised Christian, but not evangelical. Those who influenced them to join that tribe were part of a political movement meant to create a voting bloc who would consistently and dogmatically support Republican candidates like Ronald Reagan. To the elites behind this, Christian virtue wasn't the end goal. It was the bait with which they could lure good, trusting people into supporting elites who acted out of pure self-interest. This is still happening today, by the way. Why do you think oil billionaires fund the dubious religious zealotry of the Daily Wire? They've got to make sure that religious folks believe that voting for the interests of morally challenged rich people is actually God's will. With this in mind, I don't think it's surprising that the evangelicals of the generation who raised us struggle with moral consistency. They look up to those who don't model it themselves. I am thankful, though, that this didn't wholly eliminate their virtues. Many of them did, after all, pass enough of them along to us that, when asked why we stand apart from the church on moral grounds, we can reply, "I'm just doing what you taught me."
That clip you just saw was from Drew, who hosts the Genetically Modified Skeptic channel, which is a wonderful, compassionate, yet very analytical channel, Genetically Modified Skeptic, where he is an atheist, but he grew up very devout. He was a very conservative Christian, very evangelical, and one of the things of his channel is the key part, one of the foundational pillars of how it works is not only is he very compassionate, but he's also very, he grew up as, well, it's the deconstruction part of it. And if you're new to the term deconstruction, you can consider it the kind of exit testimony for someone who has left the Christian religion. Now, I'm going to use Christianity to exemplify a lot of my points, but it is not limited to it. There are people who have left the Muslim faith, There are people have left a variety of religions for various reasons, but all of it mostly are from people who were incredibly devout and realized something just was not making any sense. In that video, I took an excerpt from. That video was regarding, if anyone wants to look it up, it's the video called 3 Christian Teachings That Made Me Leave the Church. And I want to pinpoint 2 things from that that really resonated with me, because I've had a very similar journey in my deconstruction. And it is, one, teaching people, raising them to be very discerning, right? To really find the truth of something. And the other aspect was let's see, so discernment and then compassion. Compassion is a big thing that I was raised to being. And knowing how I'm naturally just a very giving individual, discernment and compassion are naturally a part of who I am. And so being raised in a Christian church congregation and a Methodist congregation, it was very easy for me to absorb biblical teachings and ultimately share it. And because I understood the Bible so well, I was looking to see other older individuals exemplify the great qualities of a Christian individual. Unfortunately, through time, I started to realize the level of accountability is very inconsistent. And I found that the quality of Christians was just, it was like a spectrum. It ranged from the light Christian all the way to the incredibly conservative but not necessarily compassionate Christian. And I found that very puzzling. And I know now, at least in the last few years, that American Christianity operates a bit differently than Christianity across the world. And so I'm in a very unique position to really learn from these individuals who see themselves as leaders on the spiritual front. I'm trying to pull up right now a quote from an Oklahoma state representative, John Talley, who is a Republican. And he was speaking on religion. He was actually a former pastor, and he turned a politician. And he was pointing out, actually, let me pull it up here. Why don't we follow all the other Old Testament laws? There's about 4,000 of them. And one of them is to not allow wives to wear jewelry or stone your child if they're disobedient. And he reasoned, why don't we do that? Well, it's because we pick and choose what we want to follow. So he's admitting that even though he's speaking to one particular case, it really exemplifies the wide challenge of Christianity across the world and how Christianity evolves differently for different cultures. People take portions of biblical teachings and make it their own, because individualizing your faith is really a part of that journey. It's a spiritual journey. Whether you're Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, you make up your own spiritual systems. It is individual. It is an intimate journey. The difference with major organizations like Christianity and Muslims is that you have a congregation of people that believe similar things, and you have a spiritual leader, a pastor, an imam, someone that unifies this agreed upon belief, and they teach you the unifying principles which bind everyone together. Now, I want to get a little darker here because I think there are a number of people that don't realize there are certain parts of the non-Christian culture, those who oppose the Christian organization. There are certain pieces that exist which might horrify you or disturb you, or at least at the most part, make you resistant. It is the term, there is no hate like Christian love. And that phrase, it comes from people who are often feeling betrayed. They have suffered under the Christian organization. They've been outcast by the Christian organization. and just been removed by those that, you know, and those who are caring about the others who've been outcast or betrayed. So those who have heavy compassion, choosing to leave the Christian organization because others around them have been abused, because we have been raised to be discerning and compassionate. But if we are raised to discern only to the limit of attributing all truths back to God, at some point this logic is going to break, because it's going to hit the limit of compassion, where what are you doing as an organization, a congregation, or as an identity which exemplifies compassion? And there have been enough people who have been suffering, like the LGBTQ community, or have been exiled, who have been rebuked because it didn't follow the mainstream standards of a faith, that ultimately we've had to create extra layers of culture independent of religion, and because we want to care more about people regardless of what the main body qualifies us to be. And so this failure of compassion by human beings, regardless of spiritual or religious origin, this is a blue ocean. This, in business terms or in strategic terms, a blue ocean means that there's a massive opportunity. Now, I know that there are more liberal Christians, liberal religious folks who are incredibly compassionate, because at the end of the day, their religion reinforces the qualities that they naturally have as good people. There is a clip from Stephen Fry, whether I put it at the beginning or end of this, regarding how the qualities of an individual should not be based on a belief of a higher power, because at the end of the day, we have shown that we are capable of being good-natured individuals, whether we have a bad day, whether we believe in something or not. There is empathy, there's emotional intelligence that exists between people, that crosses barriers, that is independent of religion or faith. And I feel like this is an incredible gap, because even in the Baptist church that my family and I used to go to, my parents will still go, my sister will sometimes go, but you know, that worship leader there, that pastor, like, he doesn't really support LGBTQ. He's very, like, pro, I guess, whatever force reinforces his conservative views. And it's fascinating because the format of the church itself is what could be considered very liberal. But he has an angle of conservative views. But either way, there is a lack of accountability amongst religious organizations that needs to be addressed, that needs to be looked at, understood, and recognized that there are certain things that don't work, that are not sustainable, that there are policies exposited by religious scripture that don't really work in our modern understanding of human compassion. And I would ask that from a systemic point of view, people really look at the cycle of their organizations, their each individual church that they're a part of, organizations, and see where compassion exists and see where compassion doesn't exist. And if you find the parts of that organization where lack of compassion exists, really wonder why that is. Look at where the injustices are, and at the end of the day, are you complicit to that lack of compassion in your organization? Do you really need the foundational structures of that organization, that congregation, that social group, to really maintain yourself as a better individual? Now, to be clear, I do have a number of friends who are religious in sense of maintaining a level of confidence externally, which benefits them as they achieve great things. Because we all know statistically that believing in something beyond yourself really can push a person beyond the limits that they feel that they have. It's almost like having a physical trainer that's helping you push beyond what you feel your physical limits are. It has that effect. I also want to emphasize that, aside from looking at your own congregation, look at the deconstruction of videos that are out there, because a lot of it is not attacking the Christian faith so much as people sharing a journey, whether you're Christian or Mormon or whichever. People are sharing a journey of how devout they were and the sequence of how they eventually left the organization, because there's a very human, compassionate story that comes from each individual person, and you could really feel for them. Just to kind of go back to my own deconstruction, yeah, I left because I didn't see the type of compassion that I thought was unified, that was universal amongst Christians. I left thinking, yeah, maybe I'll go Buddhism, because that's a very compassionate organization. They want to rid the world of suffering. But then I started to realize over time, as I evolved as a systems thinker, that Taoism makes more sense, because it's representative of flow, of cycles, the connectivity and the relationship between all things. So that worked best for me, because it's a continuity between my logic structure, my compassion structure, and then now my spiritual structure. I want to behoove each and every one of you that everyone is capable of being incredibly compassionate, to care for others, to support one another. A lot of that effort, a lot of that work does not involve biblical scriptures. A lot of that work does not involve going to a church. A lot of that does not involve pulling people into a religion. A lot of times those acts of compassion, generosity exist because you yourself believe in it. You yourself are setting an example of leadership for other people. And, there are people who would rather attach it to some sort of brand, of some sort of Christian brand, or, traits that are exemplified of a faith. But honestly, from my journey in the church, there have been many people that do not have the mental health support. There have been my own experience, and also the journey of others through church, where they've experienced abuse. They've experienced a spiritual leader, a pastor, a priest that exemplifies a message of division and hate, or dislike. And I really encourage each and every one of you to really dig within yourself, meditate on it, read, feel it out, and then listen to these deconstruction messages, and really ask yourself, where are the opportunities to be more compassionate? Where is the seed of being better as a human being planted? Because what's more powerful than just being a part of an organization? It's exemplifying a lot of the compassionate traits that a lot of people believe Jesus had. So why isn't that being exemplified by each individual more so than just rallying behind whatever the church or the group wants to do? So that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see more compassion in the religious space, because that is one major area that I don't feel enough people recognize, that they're generating a lot of the lost, the outcasts, because most people are only focused on how religion is going down the drain, how they're losing members, that they're being attacked. No, you could fight that battle, fine, but the battle that you're not willing to recover from is everyone else that has left. Maybe it's for the better. I've seen a many variety of people from all walks of life, religion or not, that are incredibly kind, compassionate, great people. Not really shoving their beliefs down other people's throat. Because, it's compassion and generosity should just not have a label in the end. It doesn't need an extra identity layer. Each individual should be responsible and accountable for their actions. And I'd like to see more of that. Yeah, that's about it.
I wonder, are you, I mean, it does seem to, are you an atheist?
Yeah, I suppose I am. I take my cue from the great philosopher Bertrand Russell, who...
I love Bertrand Russell.
He's wonderful. Yeah. But he was asked why he was an atheist, and he said, surely you mean agnostic, because you don't know there isn't a God.
Right.
He said, no, I don't know there isn't a God. That's quite true. He said, but I also don't know that there isn't a giant teapot orbiting Venus in such an angle and way that we will never see it. However, I am perfectly entitled to base my life on the supposition that such a teapot does not exist and not to allow my life to be determined by those who do believe in such a teapot. And that is my view about God.
I like Carl Sagan's thing about atheism, which he said, when people say, is there a God or is there not a God, he said, the question is too vague. You know, you have to define what do you mean by this. His idea, you know, him saying the idea of a large white man with a beard deciding what goes on in people's individual lives seemed absurd. But the idea that there was an intelligence beyond what he understood, the St. Augustine's kind of, you know, to understand the mind of God is like putting the ocean into a cup. That seems like a little more...
But it's a very new way of looking at the world, and indeed much of the world, most of the world, are animists, and they have many gods, and I think that's much more attractive. Why there should be one, it's very recent. There was one pharaoh who decided... Akhenaten, exactly, and he was killed for it.
Yes, he was. They were very upset with
the priests decided...
He was Tutankhamun's dad.
That's right.
Because Tutankhamun's original name was Tutankhaten. And then he changed it back to Tutankhamun because his father was an idiot.
He's good.
Yes.
He's good.
Yes, I remember hearing about that.
King Tut's, exactly.
Yeah.
And he was the first, on record at least, as a monotheist who thought there was one God. But it's not natural to believe in one God. I would think quite natural to believe in a sort of principle of trees and a principle of rivers, and in the way that the Greeks did, which makes fantastic storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, it does, but people get very cross if you kind of suggest that perhaps
there's a passive-aggressive victim status that religious people now have, which is that they go, oh, these fundamental atheists. Well, I'm not a fundamentalist atheist. Being an atheist doesn't mean anything to me. I don't want anybody else to be an atheist. I have no interest in spreading atheism any more than if there was a word to describe someone who doesn't believe in the tooth fairy, a flimpist, for example, then I would have to say I'm a flimpist. But being a flimpist is meaningless. It just means I don't believe in the tooth fairy.
Right.
It doesn't involve a set of values. It doesn't involve... My set of values comes from humanism, from the Enlightenment, from the very set of values that built this country, the set of values that of Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson and people who actually thought for themselves and didn't take any text as gospel or any which Marxists did and which many religions do.